My name is Erica Coley, and I am the Wetlands Education Program Assistant here at the BC Wildlife Federation. I'm very happy to be joining you all today to help facilitate this learning and knowledge sharing session on the behalf of the BC Wildlife Federation's STREAM team, who are our boots on the ground team doing low-tech process-based restoration work. My role today is going to be to help you all get the most from this webinar. I am not a subject matter expert on this topic, but rather here to keep us organized and make sure your questions are answered. On the call with me as well is our Wetlands Education Program Coordinator, Alana Higginson, who will be helping me on the back end, as well as sharing some resources in the chat. And a big thank you to Jennifer Rogers and Geneva Behan, our beaver restoration coordinator and assistant, who have pulled together a fantastic lineup of speakers for us today. So I want to acknowledge that we do have people joining us from across what is known as British Columbia, who are all on their own personal reconciliation journeys. I would like to humbly acknowledge and show respect to the Indigenous people who, since time immemorial and to this day, have lived in relation with and stewarded these lands that we are all privileged enough to call home. Through watershed restoration, conservation, and education, the BC Wildlife Federation has had the opportunity to work with First Nations across the province. We are incredibly grateful to the elders, knowledge holders, guardians, technicians, and all those who have shared their knowledge with us. And we look forward to continuing to build and grow these relations. I am currently calling in from Vancouver, which is the unceded ancestral, traditional, and contemporary territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the BC Wildlife Federation's office operates on the territories of the Semiahmoo, Katzie, Stolo, Wasanich, Kwantlen, Chemainus, and Halkmidi Treaty Group nations. We are deeply appreciative to be able to meet and learn together on their territories. And it's too far. There we go. And thank you as well to our funders. Those you see on the screen here are all those who have supported our low-tech process-based restoration projects across BC. A little bit of information on the BC Wildlife Federation's watershed team. I don't know why it keeps going too far. Maybe I should have practiced as well. A little information on the BC Wildlife Federation's watershed team. The watershed team is a department of the Greater BC Wildlife Federation. We are dedicated to protecting, conserving, and restoring water and watersheds across BC for future generations. We are focused on enhancing watershed security using 3 core elements. First, watershed education, where we teach you to steward wetlands and fish habitat in your community. Then we have conservation tools, where we are working on the development of tools to assess, catalog, enhance the understanding and management of wetlands. And finally, watershed restoration, where we implement various techniques to build and restore wetlands and stream habitat, including low-tech process-based restoration conducted by our STREAM team. So a little bit of notes on housekeeping. We see on the screen here is our agenda. We have 7 different presentations for you today with question and answer periods. Alana will share a photo of this agenda in the chat for everyone to reference throughout the morning. We will be having a 10-minute break around 10 a.m. and another 5-minute break around 11 a.m. with the webinar finishing by 12 p.m. Pacific time. So setting you up for success, this is a few notes about Zoom so you can get the most out of this webinar session. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. Please pose any questions for the presenters using this Q&A function, as we may not be able to get through all the questions during the Q&A period. To help us prioritize questions, we also encourage you to click the thumbs up icon under each question in the Q&A box to upvote them, and you can see that on your screens there as well. There is also a chat box. Feel free to use the chat if you want to let us know where you're calling in from, share any comments or resources with the whole group. And for those who would like them, there is a closed caption button to turn on subtitles for your device. All right. So to ensure we're all on the same page, I do have a few slides overviewing low-tech process-based restoration, just as a little intro before we start getting into the presentations. So low-tech process-based restoration, or commonly called LTPBR, aims to restore streams their natural self-sustaining state by mimicking the natural processes of a healthy stream corridor. It's particularly beneficial for structurally starved systems that are lacking in habitat complexity and hydrologic connectivity. So process-based means the focus is on initiating or enhancing natural fluvial and geomorphic processes that improve ecosystem health and resilience over time. And the low tech means the restoration is achieved using small scale, often hand-built structures made from natural materials. These structures are designed to be temporary, allowing natural processes to take over. The scalability of LTPBR means it can be adapted to different levels of watershed degradation. We're able to build more structures over a larger stream reach to actually scale up and treat the level of degradation that our watersheds are facing. Streams rely on physical structures such as wood, rocks, beaver dams to support habitat and function. These structures help slow water, reduce erosion, store moisture, and maintain flow during dry periods. It creates diverse habitat for fish, amphibians, and other aquatic life, and it helps trap sediment and nutrients, thus improving water quality. Human impacts such as wood removal, beaver removal, channelization for agriculture infrastructure have degraded structures, thus leading to erosion and habitat loss. So restoring these structures in streams using LTPBR methods helps streams regain resilience and self-sustainability. So some of the common goals of LTPBR. LTPBR is a versatile tool and it can be applied in diverse restoration contexts, such as to enhance ecosystem resilience to flood, fires, and droughts, or support post-fire recovery by slowing runoff, reducing erosion, and promoting vegetation regrowth, addressing channel incisions by rebuilding bed elevation and reconnecting floodplains, increasing in-stream complexity to create habitat for fish and aquatic life, and improve water quality by trapping sediments and nutrients. So what are beaver dam analogs? These BDAs are tools to be used in LTPBR. These are simple hand-built structures that are made from natural materials like wood, mud, and willow. They mimic natural beaver dams and restore stream function as well as habitat. They slow the flow of water, increase groundwater recharge, and promote floodplain connectivity. The structures also encourage beaver activity, helping sustain long-term restoration. Now, what are post-assisted log structures? These are another tool, part of LTPBR. PALs are built using post and logs to create in-stream complexity, and these structures mimic natural wood accumulation, promoting natural processes and structural recovery. Low-tech process-based restoration is, too far, my goodness. Low-tech process-based restoration is a growing field here in BC, and this webinar is all about showcasing leading projects in our region. It's an opportunity to share knowledge, learn from each other's successes and challenges, and highlight the diversity of work being done. So to keep things engaging, presenters will share quick 10-minute snapshots of their projects. And for more in-depth information on LTPBR, you can check out the following resources. Here, if you'd like to learn more, the LTPBR manual is a great comprehensive guide on designing and implementing low-tech process-based restoration projects. And the Explorer website is an interactive tool for exploring projects, techniques, and resources. And there's also some free learning modules on LTPBR and more resources on the BC Wildlife Federation Watershed Team website. And these have all been shared in the chat. All right. So before we jump into the presentation, I want to introduce our first presenters as well as our expert moderators, Sam Bango and Alex Walt. Sam is a project manager at Anabranch Solutions, where she works with teams on all phases of LTPBR projects, from the initial site visit and permitting through implementation to post-project reporting and monitoring. Alex is a river scientist interested in utilizing low-tech, process-based restoration strategies to leverage disturbances such as wildfire and post-fire floods to promote healthy aquatic heterogeneity. Sam and Alex have a tremendous amount of experience in LTPBR and the monitoring of these structures, and we are incredibly fortunate to have them joining us today as presenters and expert moderators who will be helping me answer some of the more general LTPBR-based questions. Well, I will strive to make sure all questions are posed to the appropriate panelists. Where possible, if you're asking a question, please include any descriptive info, such as the presenter's name in your question. And with that, I will hand it over to Sam and Alex.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that intro. We are so grateful to be a part of this and be able to take part in this discussion. So in partnership with Utah State University and NOAA Fisheries, folks at our company started building low-tech process-based restoration structures over 20 years ago and have since built over 10,000 structures with partners on projects across North America. Along the way, we've had lots of challenges, lessons learned, and some really great days working in these incredible landscapes.
So why are we here? That story is a very long one, but in short, complex rivers like this that are rich with structure and are laterally connected to their floodplains are in decline, and that's due to a variety of impacts. Removal of beavers and wood from riverscapes across the continent has resulted in these simplified stream channels that lack complex habitat for species like salmonids. The scale of river degradation is immense, and low-tech process-based restoration emerged as a strategy to address a larger spatial extent of degraded river habitat and broaden treatments from reaches to networks. So we'll start today's webinar by presenting the main tools utilized in low-tech process-based restoration and briefly touch on how our approach has evolved from years of implementation and monitoring. While every riverscape is unique and requires some site-specific designs and approaches, we'll try to parse out some of the broad-scale challenges or changes in our construction methods, focusing mainly on BDAs and post-assisted log structures. So as Erica mentioned, we have three main tools in the low-tech process-based restoration toolkit, and that's beaver dam analogs, which mimic the form and function of beaver dams, log jams, which aim to mimic wood accumulations and bolster structure in larger stream systems, and rock structures, which were developed by Bill Zedike, and those are used primarily in smaller streams to improve wetlands and reverse some incision cycles and ephemeral draws. But as I said, we'll be focusing mainly on log jams and BDAs today.
So before I dive into construction methods, I want to share a quick note on BDAs and fish passage. We've conducted a long-term and large-scale experiment on BDAs and their impact to steelhead populations, and that was the Bridge Creek Intensively Monitored Watershed. We found in that experiment that BDAs are effective at capturing sediment within the channel and broadening active flow paths across the valley bottom. They were also effective at increasing the production of a threatened Nomicus population by increasing available habitat and improving existing habitat. And in the Bridge Creek IMW, there was a struggling but present beaver population. Prior to restoration, there were 22 natural beaver dams in the project site, and 17% of the steelhead that entered Bridge Creek passed through the study area. Following restoration in 2016, there were 164 beaver dams, or BDAs as well, and 29% of the steelhead that entered Bridge Creek passed through the study area. So this 30-kilometer, 15-plus year study suggests that more beaver dams and/or BDAs at higher densities can support successful fish passage. And throughout that journey, we've learned a few things about how to actually construct those BDAs. So I'm going to rewind to when folks at our company first started building BDAs, and the construction style of choice was the wicker weave. This structure starts with pounding a line of posts in a U shape and then weaving woody materials like willow between them. We then add a little bit of fine sediments and gravels to the upstream end. What happened, we happened to be building in the Bridge Creek IMW near a beaver colony at the time, And when the beavers found these structures, they immediately showed us that our construction method was subpar for water retention and longevity and offered a fix. Beavers started adding material to the downstream end of the structure, taking it from a really acute structure profile to an obtuse, solid design that forced water up and over the crest of the dam. That led us to build a BDA that looks a lot more like natural beaver dams. And a key point is that unlike the wicker weave, this structure can be built in the absence of posts, and we'd actually recommend starting that way and then adding posts at the end for structural redundancy. To build it, it requires a combination of sediment and wood materials to be placed at the same time. And when building in flowing streams, this structure can immediately pond water and force greater lateral connectivity. We've also found that due to the obtuse structure profile and sheer amount of materials used in this style of building, the longevity of this structure type can be greater than a wicker weave, which tend to get in-cut and or pushed over in higher flows. So for these reasons, this style of BDA can be really important in areas that have deep ice and snow and larger freshets. Here's an example of BDAs in action. This stream was an incised single thread, but with the placement of a few BDAs, we were able to create more lateral connectivity by forcing water into what are now perennial side channels on the same day of construction.
We conducted another long-term and large-scale watershed experiment to see if building logjam mimicry structures could help improve habitat in a steeper gravel bed stream that also hosted a wild Omicus population. We call these structures post-assisted log structures, or PALs, and similar to BDAs, these structures were stabilized by driving wooden posts into the stream bed, this time around and securing a hand-assembled log jam. What we found was that the geomorphic effect of this method was much more runoff dependent, but that they could be built at roughly 5 times the speed. These types of structures proved to be effective in constricting flows and developing pools, bars, and riffles where plain bed runs and rapids once were. They proved to be a great pairing with BDAs, especially in some of the larger streams where BDAs may be less practical in the mainstream, but more appropriate on the floodplain or side channels. But what we learned was that some of the structures breached and reaggregated onto each other. Some PALs grew larger and started forcing more complexity in their vicinity. Through years of monitoring, we related the breaching and reaccumulation of wood as a positive influence on river processes such as deposition, scour, aggradation, and floodplain connection. We started building PALs bigger, and the pools they developed got deeper, and the bars they deposited grew larger and more complex. Our biggest takeaway from this 36-kilometer and 15-year study is that structurally degraded gravel bed rivers need a lot more wood than anticipated, and that both stabilizing wood and embracing wood mobility and reaccumulation led to in-channel complexity and increased lateral connectivity. Nowadays, we're using a low-tech approach to add larger pieces of wood into channels, thus mimicking mechanisms associated with natural wood recruitment, like wind throw or wind snapping. Kenzie here pulled this entire alder snag down using a hand-operated mechanical winch. She left this tree in place to provide a binding site for wooden transport to be stored temporarily. She was able to include the root ball, which will cause channel beds scour and form a deep pool around it, benefiting a threatened Omicus population. It will also serve as the key piece in the formation of larger wood jams when flows exceed bankful, with the goal of fostering a complex, multi-threaded reach. Techniques like this are helping us be more nimble and light-footed in the field, all while creating larger and more consequential log jams in structurally degraded streams. So in conclusion, I just want to mention the last time that Sam and I were in British Columbia, we took a float out on the Similkameen River and found that beavers were actively recruiting large trees into the main stem and also building dams in the side channels and just making a real mess of things. We look forward to hearing the lessons learned in British Columbia, and we hope to learn from your implementation stories as we share some of our own. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam and Alex. I love to see when people stick to our 10-minute timeline. All right, next I am incredibly happy to be welcoming Jess Holden with the Columbia Wetland Stewardship Partners. Jess is a passionate young biologist who is working to support the Columbia Wetland Stewardship Partners on multiple project objectives, including habitat securement, research, and now beaver dam analogs. So I will welcome you to turn off your camera, which I see you've already done, and go right ahead.
Hi, thank you for the introduction, Erica. And I just want to echo Sam's feelings of being incredibly thankful to be here, and a huge thanks to BCWF for pulling this webinar together. So to begin, there we go. The Columbia Wetland Stewardship Partners, or we'll just call ourselves CWSP from here on out, is an NGO located in the southeast corner of BC within the headwaters of the Columbia River. And our work is focused on research and conserving the wetlands and wildlife of the Columbia Valley. For those of you that haven't been able to see the headwaters of the Columbia River yet, the river begins as a large lake, which then flows out into a large floodplain ecosystem that extends from Invermere to Golden. And the processes of these wetlands, which are protected by a wildlife management area and are now designated as a UN Ramsar wetland of international importance, are heavily influenced by the American beaver. So this is where CWSP's focus on beaver dam analogs began, and where one of our sub-projects still remains. However, the nature of the system, with a large 3-meter flood pulse and flood basins that can hold a lot of water, permitting for these projects has been slow, and we have yet to implement any structures in this area. But we're currently discussing 3 project sites with the province and hope to implement the first of them in spring of 2026. For some context on this area, many wetlands in the Columbia River floodplain fill with the flood pulse, but when the river recedes, the water is able to exit through levee gaps and drain in some of the wetland basins. And this leaves these types of wetlands empty over the winter and into early spring, when open water habitat for migratory birds is critical. So the objectives of these sites is to build BDAs and levee gaps to extend the hydro period into early spring. And while in the process of working towards a permit at one of our selected sites, beavers actually got busy. So this here is one of our sites, and they constructed multiple beaver dams in the levee gap, which align with the proposed construction plan that we were hoping to implement. This is the water depth in the associated wetland basin, comparing 2021 in orange to 2024 in pink, and 2021 was before the beaver dams were in place. So yes, while there is natural variability in the flood pulse, the important takeaway is that the water depth increased in the fall, which was retained for migratory bird use in early spring. And this example just provides some evidence to support the actions that we're trying to implement in other wetlands within the floodplain. So in an effort to broaden the focus to conserving the entire watershed, CWSP initiated a second BDA sub-project into the upland area of the valley, which focused on conserving water in small tributary streams that flow into the Columbia River. And currently our sites are focused on the western upland bench of the Columbia Valley, and this will be the focus for the rest of the presentation. And to begin this work, we first identified all of the lentic habitat types on the western upland bench, and we conducted a drone inventory of these sites. In 2023, we were able to drone 45% of the mapped freshwater atlas lake and wetland polygons within our study area. We identified 3 main water sources for wetlands on the bench, and these included wetlands on lake edges, along stream channels, and isolated wetlands. And our goal of this inventory was not only to locate potential restoration sites, but also to assess the status and vulnerability of these small wetlands. And a component of this included assessing vegetation communities. For example, encroaching shrubs or conifers into wetland basins was considered evidence of potential drying. And we originally expected those isolated wetlands on the right, those with the least amount of water supply, to show the highest signs of drying, but that wasn't actually the case. And it was the wetlands along stream channels that had the most signs of drying, which indicated to us there's another variable at play. Which leads us to the role of beavers and the foundation for a BDA project. Many of these wetlands along stream channels show evidence of historic beaver activity. This here is an image of an outflow of one of these wetlands, and you can see multiple mounds which are now covered in trees, but those are degraded historic beaver dams built along the stream. And you can also see that these large remnant beaver dams have been eroded and now have small gaps in them, which allows the stream to flow through without pooling behind them. To compare the historic and present conditions, I brought in some images of one of our restoration sites, which we've termed beaver channels. And it's evident that in 1969, the site held more water than it did in subsequent photos taken in the 1980s in both the upper and lower beaver ponds. And to no surprise, both of these flooded areas are located upstream of remnant beaver dams. In the fall of 2024, we built 2 BDAs at the site in the locations indicated by those red circles, and those are those gaps in those large beaver dams. And based on field measurements, we estimate that repairing these gaps will restore water levels to what was observed in that 1969 air photo. This work is going to replenish and increase the area of wetland components within this streamscape. And since our restoration sites are using VDAs in a slightly different way with more focus on restoring wetland habitats rather than repairing degraded stream sections, I thought we could work through one of our examples to show how we're still exhibiting those restoration principles identified by Wheaton. Oh. So this is an example of one of our restoration focuses. It's an unnamed watershed located northwest of Radium, and it's a tributary that flows into Francis Creek. This watershed and all others on the western upland bench are highly impacted by logging, and you can see the historic cut blocks there in red. And you can see multiple wetlands within this watershed. However, a majority of them, specifically on that southern map stream route, are largely overtaken by conifer and shrubs. And these are not candidates for BDAs due to the lack of stream flow. However, there is evidence of nearby drying that supports our restoration initiatives in the rest of the watershed. So along that northern route, there's 4 main wetlands that show evidence of historic beaver activity. Unfortunately, due to permitting constraints, we have to kind of select which beaver dams we want to focus on repairing, so we're not storing too much volume. But we're kind of focusing on those 2 on the left, Northbound and Big Dam. And we can see from this old air photo from 1987 that shows water stored within those selected sites. And again, the imagery collected in 1999, these beaver dam analogs are no longer holding the water that once supported. So in terms of addressing that first process-based restoration principle, we're not sure what has caused beaver abandonment. It's likely a combination of historic trapping pressures, decreased water, and a lack of food. These wetlands are largely surrounded by conifers, so we don't feel like we could successfully relocate beavers yet, but we've been talking with BCWF to see if this could be a component or a future project goal. Like many places in BC, logging practices can cause landscape level impacts that can influence stream systems, but this isn't easily addressed. But one thing that we can focus on is the loss of those remnant beaver dams, which has reduced the integrity of the streamscape. And so currently the system contains many stream reaches that occasionally flow through dry beaver meadow, but repairing these dams would restore the wetland part of that stream-wetland mix that has been lost in this watershed. In terms of identifying the local potential of the system, we feel that the beavers are probably doing a better job at it than we can, so we're focusing our efforts around restoring those existing beaver dams. And connecting that local potential to the idea of streams need space, we can see here that the beavers have selected the best locations where the valley widens to provide the stream with space to move, and also where the stream has a low enough gradient to successfully inundate areas and create wetlands. While our projects put emphasis on a few installed structures, the location and number of them match well to the scale of the system, problem, and would accomplish the restoration project goals of restoring that historic storage capacity. So in Wheaton's guidebook, he identifies that when disrupted processes occur at a reach scale, like in this system, that restoration actions at individual sites can effectively address those root causes. And while our main structures will be those remnant beaver dam repairs, we are also currently identifying locations for additional structures just up and downstream of the remnant dam to help force complexity of that stream system and increase diversity of flow paths laterally throughout these valleys. In addition, we'll be respecting the principle that the importance of structure varies and that you need to consider the geomorphic setting of the project. So the diversity among reaches due to those differences in valley widths and stream slope should still be respected as the beavers did, which is why we're still focusing our efforts around those now drained wetland complexes. In addition, these wetland sites contribute important habitat diversity to the overall streamscape. And we're also really grateful that remnant dams from past beaver populations still contribute to the resiliency of the system. And again, we will be installing additional structures around these remnant beaver dams to add to the strength of their projects. As with our restorations completed in the fall of 2024, all structures will be constructed out of locally sourced and natural building materials. And here's an example of one of our restoration sites, Estland, taken this spring at our pre-freshet inspection, and you can see the BDA down there in the bottom. It survived the winter, so that's exciting. Lastly, we like to partly interpret letting the system do the work as taking the advice from the beavers, as they've already identified the best places to install our structures in the system. And we hope that our inputs will allow the system to become more hospitable for beavers so that future relocations can be considered so that we can get the system back to self-sustained. So in summary, CWSP has 2 BDA subprojects that hope to maintain diversity, increase structure, and build resiliency within the streamscapes of Columbia River mainstem and tributaries. And we have restored 2 sites in the uplands area and we'll be monitoring those sites to assess our effectiveness. And over the next year and a half, we hope to restore an additional 7 sites within our region. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. Just a few notes from some things in the chat. Elena did say that it seems as though some people are not able to copy and paste from the chat, but others are. Any links that are sent in the chat, we will be sure to send to you all in a follow-up email for those who are not seeming to be able to copy and paste. As well, I do remind people to submit any questions in the Q&A box rather than in the chat, as they may get buried in the chat. All right, so now I am happy to welcome Jen Rogers as well as Morgan Jumbo for our last presentation of this first section. So Jen Rogers is a beaver restoration project lead with the BC Wildlife Federation. She has her master's in ecological restoration, where she studied habitat suitability for beaver-based restoration. Her and her team constructed 6 LTPBR projects last year and built 71 beaver dam analogs. And Morgan is the special projects lead of the aquatics department for the Nooaitch band from Merritt, BC of the Inklapama Nation. So I will invite both of you to unmute and turn your cameras on and go right ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, my name is Morgan Jumbo from Nooaitch Indian Band here in Merritt, BC, ecological territory. Project aims to reconnect this stream to the historical floodplain and to help mitigate drought, flooding, and wildfire risks through low-tech process-based restoration efforts using hand tools, woody material, and mud in a low-gradient system. The use of channel spanning beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures will aim to reduce water velocity and disperse high flows onto inset floodplains, functionally reducing stream power during peak flow to limit further downcutting and channel incision. Over time, this project will create deep pools and water habitat better suited for fishing and water storage. Spice Creek is in the Dean Fire area south of Merritt. There was a beaver released from this site not too long ago, probably 2 kilometers away from the site, and the hopes were that colonies can migrate up and down the stream and let beavers do their work. But for now, I'll just pass it on to my colleague, Jen. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen. And yeah, I'm the Beaver Restoration Project Lead with the BC Wildlife Federation. And so today we'll be going kind of more in depth into a project that it was on a tributary to Spice Creek that we constructed last year with Nooaitch Indian Band. So as Morgan mentioned, this site is located near Merritt. It's a tributary to Spice Creek, which then flows into the larger Nicola River. And my slides are quite slow. There we go. So the site itself is located on unceded public land. And so this area we were working in for this project spanned about 350 meters. And so the area was pretty low gradient and had an average stream width of about 4 meters. But the channel itself is quite incised, as you can tell from some of these photos. So it can be incised up to 1.5 meters in some areas. So as a result of this, the stream is disconnected from its floodplain. So water typically isn't able to flow over the banks and onto the floodplain. So that really limits groundwater recharge. There's also a lot of minimal structure or any sort of features within the stream to provide any sort of habitat complexity or kind of slow the flow of water or provide any sort of diverse hydraulic conditions. And so part of this was like the watershed in general has been through a lot. There was an atmospheric river event in 2021 that really impacted the entire Merritt area, but this likely worsened the channel incision. The area is known to undergo some pretty severe drought conditions throughout the summer. There's cattle use and there's clear-cut logging in the watershed. And there's also quite a bit of evidence of historic beaver use within the watershed, but there's limited active colonies of beavers within these watersheds. So kind of all of these factors are contributing to a more degraded state. And let me skip to the next slide. Okay. And so the goal of this project was to address some of these issues and kind of get the stream back on a recovery trajectory. So as Morgan was explaining, one of our main goals was to really just add structures to slow the flow of water and kind of limit some of that erosive potential because the stream is so downcut into itself. The stream power isn't able to spread out over the floodplain, so it just keeps cutting down instead of spreading out. So a lot of our structures were aimed to slow that flow and eventually help to widen the stream so it can start to spread out, and we'll hopefully see the stream follow this kind of recovery process that we had in this nice image here. So part of that process is the widening, but then it's also the aggrading. So kind of the sediment that's mobilized from those banks would hopefully be captured by other structures that are downstream. So we're not just widening, but we're also building back up the stream bed. So hopefully we can get some floodplain reconnection eventually and get a nice, really complex habitat. Some of our other goals were just to create more diverse habitat features to help increase complexity and help create more aquatic habitat for longer periods of time. So we really wanted to boost water levels during base flow or low flow conditions. We did want to encourage beaver establishment. And of course, we really wanted to use this as an opportunity to work together to learn and to practice this restoration technique and really share this information with others. So in order to do this work, we got a Section 11 change approval. So this came with a permit over Crown land, and this permitted us to build 5 to 10 beaver dam analogs and 7 to 12 post-assisted log structures, or PALs. And we also got a scientific fish collection permit and a general wildlife permit for any incidental salvages. So our construction took place over 6 days in August. Our first day was really just a lot of site preparation, and we collected some monitoring metrics. And then our last day was really reserved for doing some post pounding, cleaning up the site, and then some follow-up monitoring. And we did have 8 staff that were pretty much dedicated on site every day. And so we ended up building 10 beaver dam analogs and 1 post-assisted log structure within that time frame. We did follow the post-LIS BDA recipe. This can be found in the low-tech process-based restoration design manual, but it essentially involves kind of building up incremental layers of sediment and brush. Yeah, one thing that we kind of really had to make note of was because we were building in August, and you'll see some of the photos of what the stream looked like when we were starting to build. Flows were very low, so we had to be very cognizant of what was happening downstream of where we were building. And yeah, hopefully this video will work as kind of like a photo time series, but this is kind of that process of incrementally building up these layers. And we put some sediment on the front face of the dam to kind of help create that matrix and kind of a ramp that leads onto the upstream face of the dam. As you can see, there is the turbidity is quite high when you're initially building and adding that sediment, but it does clear up within a few hours. And we also do see water pooling right away. Like you can see a difference from the upstream water level to the downstream water level. And so at the very end, we also secured our structures with untreated wooden posts using a hydraulic post pounder. So that includes this large and heavy power pack that you see, and then the post driver itself. And we secured almost all of our structures with posts. We did leave one structure postless to just see how it performs compared to the other post-assisted or post-secured structures. Okay, let's go to the next slide, if it will. Just having a little bit of technical difficulties here. Okay, there we go. And I'll just quickly go through some before and after photos, so you can see kind of what some of the immediate impacts we saw during construction. So this was one of our most downstream structures. You can see how much water it was storing. And the next one, if we can. Okay. Oh, there we go. Here's some more. It might not be very conducive to quickly flipping through some photos, but you can see how much water these structures are holding almost immediately.
Jen, I would recommend using the keys on your keyboard rather than clicking your mouse.
Thank you. There we go. Here you can see just how much surface water we're getting, and we're almost at overbank flow, but during high flow, hopefully we would be getting some overbank flow, so that's really exciting. There was a pretty large head cut right in the middle of the stream, and kind of downstream of this head cut, the erosion was a lot worse. So we kind of put a structure almost right on top of the head cut to limit some of that erosion, but we also had a structure that was right downstream of it to kind of raise the water level downstream, so it's less of a dropping and erosive force there. Here's just an aerial view of some of that. This was our post-assisted log structure that's almost completely covered in water, so it's hard to see it. But you can see that on the opposite bank, it's quite erodible. And so for our monitoring, we did a drone flight right before and right after construction. So this was done right before, and this was done right after. There was no rain event or anything in between these images, and so all the extra surface water that you see stored there was a result of our structures. In terms of other monitoring, we measured stream flow or discharge upstream and downstream, both before and after construction, and we found that there was no downstream deficits in flow after construction. We also did some elevation transects, which we'll be measuring again this spring to see if we're getting any aggradations. And we also put some shallow groundwater wells in the floodplain upstream, in the middle, and downstream of our project site. And these are some of those results. You can see the kind of orange box is our construction window. And our treatment well, which was at the middle well, it's also kind of orange/yellow. And you can see kind of before the construction, it hit 0 because the data logger was outside of the well, presumably from an animal that interfered with the well. But as soon as we arrived back on site, we put it back in the well. It leveled out at around 0.23 meters. And then you can really see when we constructed the BDAs that were in proximity to this well, it really shot up again and raised almost 181% increase in the local water level, which is really cool to see. So our next steps is just a lot of monitoring, maintenance, adaptive management, and we are doing some willow staking at this site this spring. And just some key lessons learned for us is to really try to incorporate more PALs into the design of some of the projects and throughout implementation. If you are building PALs and BDAs at the same time, I think it's better to build the PALs first, because then your wood isn't floating away from you. Also, our time required to build each structure was really a function of how big your structure is, what type of material do you have? Is it coniferous? Is it deciduous? And how close is that? And how much of their material do you have close to the stream? Also, a big learning curve for us was kind of getting our mind around that posts aren't always necessary for BDAs. You can have postless structures that perform just as well. which is something we've learned from our American colleagues. But if you are using posts, the hydraulic post pounder is extremely large and heavy and requires you to have really good access, which not a lot of our sites had. But we also got a gas-powered post driver, which was a really good alternative if we were using posts in those kinds of sites. But like a really big caveat is that we're still learning. We'll learn a lot more, I'm sure, when we come out in this spring to take a look at all of our project sites and see how structures have performed. But it's really great to also be able to learn from a bunch of other practitioners who are kind of paving the way in this type of restoration. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Morgan. All right, we're going to go into our first Q&A period. So Lena, if you wanted to stop sharing the screen, and I would like to welcome all of our presenters from these first 3 presentations to turn their cameras on. We do have a few questions. If there are more questions, please send them into the Q&A. In future Q&As, I'm going to prioritize questions for those presentations. So if you have ones for these ones, your time to ask is now. I am going to start with a question from Kurt that came in through the chat, which is for you, Jess. And I did see that you answered it, but I think you might not have toggled over to everyone. So you just sent that answer to the panelists. So Kurt asked you what you meant by permitting constraints.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I've never been on this side of a Zoom before. But yeah, Kurt, what I mean by the permitting constraints is we're trying to do our projects under Section 11 change approvals. And part of that is that you can only store up to 10,000 meters cubed within the watershed. And that's the easiest permit that we can get for this work. If we were to store more dams, it would be above that threshold, which then we'd be looking at getting water licenses. And we have a presentation from regulators later on this call, so I'm sure they'll be touching more on that and know that system much better than I do. But that's what I meant by the permitting constraints.
Awesome. All right, so I am basing the questions that I ask based on the upvotes that people have submitted in the Q&A. So that means that our next question is from Ben. I believe this is to Jen or Morgan on your project. What is the quality and quantity and fish habitat in this area, and what effects to fish were assessed prior to the installation of BDAs? I think that's what he meant.
I think so, yeah. So the fish habitat / quality quantity, we had a note of what kind of structures were in the stream before we built these additional structures, which was quite limited in terms of there was a couple wood accumulations that was providing a little bit of habitat. But when we were there, water levels were extremely low, so quantity was extremely limited. No specific metrics in terms of quantity were collected, but we do have drone imagery where you can kind of differentiate like immediately before and immediately after. And then we have some drone imagery that we took during high flow last spring, and we can compare that to high flow this spring to see kind of the difference in terms of quantity of habitat over time. And then the effects to fish, okay, that kind of follows along the same lines. But something else that we're actually looking to incorporate in our projects coming up, we did receive funding recently to actually specifically study impacts to fish. And so that will be kind of the focus of 2 of our projects that are coming up in this upcoming year. But in terms of it's mostly kind of inferring from our other monitoring metrics how it's benefiting fish. So what is the water quality like? What is the water quantity like? And what is the structure composition within the stream reach like? And yeah, I'm not sure if Morgan, if you wanted to add anything to that, but yeah, thanks for the question.
Awesome, thank you. And because it's related, I will ask in addition to that question, maybe you can touch on quick. We have a question from Jake on if you've experienced any detrimental impacts to fish passage, and if so, how have you minimized those impacts? I think you've touched on it a bit, but if you had anything else you wanted to expand on there.
think one of the big things with like BDAs and fish passage is making sure that, so we call it the hydraulic drop. So that's kind of the distance between the upstream water level, the water level upstream of your structure, and the water level downstream of your structure. You just want to make sure that that drop isn't too significant and that a fish would be able to kind of move over or around it if you're in an area that's more laterally connected. And so one method to kind of make sure that you do limit that drop is to build another BDA that's further downstream of that initial BDA. So you're kind of creating like like ladders or like stepwise pools for fish to be able to move through. But yeah, I'm not sure if Sam or Alex have anything else that they would want to add to that. But yeah, that was kind of some strategies that we used.
I think I would just add that, in the chat, I just uploaded a zip file with a couple published papers regarding fish passage and the use of beaver dams and beaver dam analogs by fish, and probably not enough time to dig through the nuances on how different salmonid species utilize beaver dams and traverse complexes of BDAs. But I think just to sum things up, definitely Jennifer was on point about increasing the density and providing jumping pools, reducing those hydraulic heads, increasing lateral connectivity to the floodplain. So there's a lot of different flow paths. And one thing that my advisor, Stephen Bennett, a British Columbia native, will also hone in is that if BDAs are the problem, more BDAs are actually the solution. And increasing the density is actually very beneficial to helping fish migration, kind of like how Sam highlighted in the Bridge Creek story, that once there were more BDAs and more natural beaver dams over time, there was much more passage and traversing through that whole network. So.
Yeah, Alex, I think you might have sent that zip file to just the hosts and panelists. So for all of our speakers, if you are going to send things to the chat, make sure you see whether you're sending it to just us or if you're sending it to everybody. So if you could resend
I'll resend that right now.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is also probably a question for you, Alex or Sam. We have a question from Michelle. Are there any areas where BDAs or PALs are not recommended?
There are lots of places where BDAs and PALs are not recommended. As Jennifer and Jess noted in their presentations, and Morgan as well, streams need space, right? And that's one of the riverscape principles when we're even considering an LTPBR project. And if you have something like limiting infrastructure immediately downstream of your project site or perhaps in that floodplain area, it might not be the best site to select an LTPBR project. The processes that we're trying to reinitiate by implementing these structure types have some level of uncertainty in them. I think it was noted as well that these structures aren't built of concrete and they aren't meant to last forever. Movement is an important part of that process and reinitiating that geomorphic processes in these streams. So there is a degree of uncertainty when we are constructing, and if you have nearby infrastructure that you're really worried about, there are some things you can do to mitigate it, but ultimately, maybe a more engineered approach could be beneficial, or a combination of the two project types. We're also starting to work in larger riverscapes and bigger systems, and we're not exactly sure where that threshold of LTPBR versus more engineered log jams is, but we are currently finding that out. And yeah, just working in some of those larger riverscapes, you might need different approaches. I don't know, Alex, do you want to jump in?
I think I think Sam really nailed it on the head. There's a different paper also, and a conceptual framework of these beads and string theory. I think Jess's presentation is just such a great example of prioritizing different areas that are worth restoring and would maximize benefits. And there's other areas that, while maybe building pals to break up, really strong hydraulics and provide refuge for fish might be advantageous. I think just prioritizing areas that maximize benefits for the species of interest is probably the highest rank on the triage. And I think just the scale of how much work that we have to do suggests that there's plenty of areas where it's appropriate to implement low-tech process-based restoration, and that we have no shortage of those priority areas. And so, yeah, finding places with decent lateral connectivity, gradient, and basics, basin characteristics like that should be investigated thoroughly.
I will just kind of wrap up too on that question that whenever we are considering an LTPBR project, we want to have some at least broad understanding of our flow, sediment, and wood beaver dynamics within that project site, and having that kind of broad or specific, depending on your project, and availability of funds to monitor that site pre-construction can really help shape the way you implement that project. So utilizing different frameworks and conceptual models to find those sites that Alex is talking about.
Awesome, great. We do have quite a few more questions in the Q&A, and I have seen some questions coming into the chat. I do remind people to submit their questions in the Q&A so that I can ask them. They don't get lost in the chat. With a look at time, we do have about 2 more minutes. So I will start with one more question and we'll see how long the answer is. And if that, maybe we can fit in another one. So this question is from Michael. It is, did anyone monitor gravel retention caused by the BDA and PAL work before and after? And if so, how did you measure it?
I can take some of that. So we did do, I mentioned elevation transects that we set up upstream and downstream of specific BDAs that we had on site at our SPIAS project. And essentially we kind of set a set distance that was upstream of the crest of the BDA and used a laser level and rod and measured what the elevation was of the stream bed, kind of at increments along the channel, and then we relayed that back to a benchmark elevation. And so we will be remeasuring that this spring. We only take that measurement once a year. And so that would kind of give us an idea of the stream profile and how kind of the stream profile is changing over time. We've only actually done that for BDA locations, not specifically PALs, because a lot of our BDAs had the purpose of specifically a grading sediment. So we wanted to see if we were actually being able to achieve that objective. I think there would be other ways to measure this, but that's just kind of what our team has done for these initial projects.
Awesome. And is there anybody else who would like to? Sam, I saw you unmute before you wanted to adding a bit.
Alex, you should jump in and talk a little bit about your thesis project and the topo surveys. I think that's a really great example.
Yeah, I think year-to-year analysis, especially with something like BDAs, is going to be really hard as you're starting to capture a lot more fine sediment. But I think it's just important to remember, these processes persist on a decadal scale, and the more we grade channels and lift them up onto the floodplain, that's when we're going to start to recycle the floodplain sediments. And where a gravel bed stream meandering through a meadow might be having great gravel little bars and riffles, we start to see that in some of the side channels, and that actually might be more advantageous for fish spawning. And we did a red survey and our long-term, large-scale, the IMW in Asotin Creek. And there were a lot more reds in the side channels. So I think, yeah, this multi-threaded goal and objective yield some of those benefits in the long term. But if we do look at annual scales, I think we can't get past the fact that, yeah, we're depositing a lot of fine sediment, and upstream of these complexes is where some of the gravels drop out, and downstream of these complexes, that's where we've starved the stream of fine sediment, and that's where it's a lot more cleaner gravels down there. So we're just re-engaging a lot of these processes, and I think if we think about one specific stream patch, we might be missing the whole meadow in that sense. But where it's kind of a conservation of mass and energy answer.
Awesome, great, thank you so much. That is going to be the end of our Q&A for our first presentation section. There are still some questions from this section that were not able to be answered. I will leave those open in the Q&A, and if any of the speakers want to go in and type answers, you're more than welcome. Or they can also be posed in our final question and answer period. So I do encourage people to continue upvoting questions so that I'm able to prioritize those that we bring to the final Q&A at the end of this webinar. For now, we are going to go on a 10-minute break before we begin again. So I will see everybody back here at 10:12 a.m. All right.
British, second largest agricultural belt in British Columbia. We're working extensively, almost exclusively on private land, which has additional challenges because it is agricultural land. We can't interfere in the asset that the farmer rancher has, but rather we need to complement them while working towards our objective, which is hydrating these streams. We have 32 streams that actually flow through the agricultural belt. We have all 4 different Pacific salmon populations here in the Nooaitch Valley. And geographically, to wrap your mind around it, we're dead center in the middle of the province of British Columbia, 10 hours north of Vancouver, for some semblance there. Whoops, I'm not moving forward here.
Okay, give that a try again, Wayne. It should be in your control.
Well, it doesn't seem to want to be in my control. You want to move the slides ahead? I'm
sure.
locked. So the opportunity here from the Chaco Valley, this is one of our streams called Night Creek. This is what it looks like in July and August. High gradient, great stream. You can see the gravel that's there. Known populations of Chinook, fry, and many other species in there, but this is a non-natal stream. Our Nooaitch Valley is going into its 3rd year of drought, so that creates opportunity. We're in a stand conversion. We're going to go from a cabbage potato type of a crop to a grape corn over time. We are on a dammed river. The streams flow into a dammed river in the Chaco. So everything's at a historic all-time low. And drought actually gave us opportunity to have farms, ranches buy in for their side of the benefit. We'll move the slide. So the objectives are similar to everybody else. We want to slow water down. We want to grow or support the riparian zone. We want to support the aquatic life that is in there. And because we are in the agricultural belt, we understand the value of the aquifers. And so we have really advanced our knowledge about aquifers, and we've also advanced the farm ranching communities that have multiple aquifers in there. And we're in the process of developing a monitoring strategy. So we've constructed 40 BDAs on 4 properties and 3 streams in the Nooaitch Valley. We've installed 18 shallow monitoring wells. Because we flooded a man's gully, we had to provide a bridge, and we're also getting to test out the pond level or fish passage opportunities. Next slide. So this is typically what we look like. We have actually 2 types of streams that need to do this. The high gradient water moves quickly through. Knight Creek is that example. Then we have a slow gradient stream, which is a lot different. And really, again, we're trying to grow a riparian zone. So even though it's called a beaver dam analog, we don't expect beavers on all of our sites yet for 10 or 15 years, but establishing that riparian zone will be there. Next slide. So this is you'll have to tag, yeah, there we go. So this is the same description as the Federation just did. Well, we are very industrial in how we have to do business because we have that access that are there. So we put ourselves onto rig mats to protect the shore banks that are there. And we're simply building the lasagna, spruce boughs, willows, dirt, spruce boughs, willows, dirt, capping it off with the willows that are there, and then pushing posts in where required. We can move to the next slide. You can see we were pushing winter here. We actually finished it. So really early successes. We had some really good rains already in the fall, so that filled our BDAs up in our streams. In this very spot here, over 7 mud puddles, we salvaged over 350 Chinook fry, 200 rainbow, and multiple other species of things that we had to put back into the Nooaitch. So that's our problem with the drought issue. So these ponding aspect here really complement us. And next slide. Again, this is a slower opportunity here. This is Murray Creek. Murray Creek has 3 arms on it that flow through the agricultural belt. In this particular case, you can see that the farmer is farming right to the edge of the stream. He has moved himself into a mental position where he actually wants to reestablish his riparian zones, wants to actually have trees on there. So we built 8 BDAs on his property, I think 4 monitoring wells, planted 1,500 cottonwoods and untold amounts of willow to create that issue that's there. And this feeding the water into the aquifer and educating farms and ranches of the reciprocal value of that to their fields is really a big part of what we're doing. Constructing the BDAs is one function. Monitoring and selling that information back to them, convincing them that the whole of the agricultural community wants to do this is really an important part of being successful. Our next slide, please. So this is the largest BDA that we built. It was an existing beaver colony that moved out of there. They had plugged the highway's culvert. We convinced them to leave the plug in there so that the farm and rancher could continue to irrigate out of there, and that we would support the populations. And so we actually kept the much longer than the highways department was happy with, but they kept it in for a couple of years while we permitted and funded these types of projects. So again, we moved our machinery out on rig mats, which are really critically important to the whole process. We built it below the beaver dam house, and the house is intact. And if you notice the pump house building that is there, and if you look below the tin roof there, you can see that at one point in time, the high water mark was actually 2 feet below the tin, and water was actually spilling over the highways road, which they lovingly protected with tarps. So moving on. You can see, again, the industrialization of how we're going about our business. That's here. We are pounding the posts in with something much bigger than what Jennifer had there. Very quick, very successful. Moving us along again, please. We have had long conversations with everybody about good beavers and bad beavers, and I think that we've come to a solid agreement with the Ministry of Environment that bad beavers do exist, and if we're going to be successful in the agricultural community, we have to do everything we can to stop what they're doing, and eliminating them forever isn't an option. So how could we live trap them? How could we relocate them? How could we entice them into other areas? So we built these nose cones, hoping that this is a tool to help us with not allowing the dam to happen inside the culvert. And it's well tested this year. It's installed already. Very expensive, but better than losing the beaver to an angry highways. Again, because we are very industrial, we actually had our contractor invest in a snipper head for us. We are very blessed to have a very progressive company in working with us. So we actually can cut the willows. So we go to into an old stand of willows, take 3 cuts from the top to the middle to the bottom. And of course, we source these in different ways on the land base itself, and we're actually loading them into an end dump and moving them to site. Next slide. Again, getting into second growth plantations and thinning, we have a company in our adjacent community has a European forwarder. So they're thinning plantations to get a release on them. They're pretty happy to see us because they actually have a commercial post-creation plant, but they would treat these. So we don't want them treated, so we just give them a dimension cut. We get 4 and 5 inch diameters, 10 feet long, 8 feet long, depending on our need. They sharpen them, we utilize them. And then you can see the lack of riparian zone on the right-hand slide, but also the willow collections. That would be off of the basis of most of the willows. Next slide.
Wayne, I will just let you know you do have about 1 minute left. So if you wanted to prioritize some content.
Yeah, just run us through. So you can see the plantings on the one slide. We're building overwintering ponds because we do have drought, and drought is a real problematic issue. So we've installed multiple overwintering ponds that are adjacent to the BDAs and the stream. Our next slide. Just a really tough being our first year, understanding how tough this was. This was the winter. This is our last days of the project that was there. Worked really good with our staff, our ministry staff, as they learned about this and went forward on it. So that was really exciting. And then adding science. Just run us to the next slide. So our monitoring wells are really a big portion of this. We're working with Ministry of Forests science teams on this. So we have a dedicated employee. Our next slide. Again, because of the monitoring issues that are there, we're going to this summer use this ERT process of building 2 and 3 dimensional monitoring maps of what our water is going into the aquifer there. And our last couple slides, just again, educating the farms and ranches about the value of the aquifer is really a big portion of this. We wouldn't have been successful 10 or 15 years ago. Drought actually gave us the opportunity. Next slide. This is the ERT system. Now this is a permanent installation, so it looks pretty messy. We're just going to lay the cables on the ground, run the electrical pulses in there, recorded, and come back post fall time again. Next slide. Again, selling it to the farm and ranching community, aquifer health, farm irrigation opportunities are permitted. The sub-irrigation is huge. A safe zone for the interface is there. So this is pretty dramatic, but pushing your cattle into there, moving your families even in there, a water source for the wildfire services, all add value to us. And our last slide, I believe. And then just our support and funders. We wouldn't have been able to do this with the Ministry of Forest not being on side, learning with us, coming out, working with that. The Federation has been unbelievable, the whole team that they have put together. And then just adding value through our universities and our different ministries that are there really makes us successful. And I think that's our last one here. Yeah. And then this is just our signage. We take great pride in putting our signs on farms and ranches. The important part is you may not have a sign on your ranch and you don't look as good as your neighbor who is a steward that's there. So it's not necessarily selling the sign idea to the landowner. It's the ones that don't have it that actually recognize that. And then just making it popular to have salmon on their ranch. It is a thing. It is something that it brings pride to it. So drought gives us opportunity, and this is the adaptation that we've moved our society to. And I think that should cover us off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wayne. It's been super enjoyable to hear about all these different projects so far. So next we are going to welcome Tom Wilms. Tom is a biologist and instructor with the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology in Merritt, BC. His work and research in salmon ecology, ecohydrology, and habitat restoration has led him down a curious path that led to Canada's largest and most iconic rodent. So Tom, I will have you turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and take it away.
Good. Thanks, Erica. And I think I'll try and make up some time here because I've only got 41 slides to go through. So here we go. So I'm going to start by borrowing an interesting exercise that I read in Ben Goldfarb's book, Eager, which is, of course, about beavers. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to. It's a great read. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and picture a healthy, free-flowing river of the North American West. If you're anything like me, you're probably imagining a stream with crystal clear water that gently trickles between a series of riffles and pools. A stream where you can sink a few beers in a rock weir you made next to a downstream gravel bar, so that after fishing and walking along its cobble banks all morning, you can sit in its cold water and quench your thirst after all the trout have moved back into their hiding places in its deep pools. If you can't picture this, welcome to British Columbia. Here's an example of what the rest of us might be picturing. Okay, I am clicking here. There we go. There's a delay here. Okay, these ideas of healthy streams are satisfying, and pictures of them might even make the cover of the next BC Outdoors magazine. Unfortunately, these ideas are also historically wrong. If you'd like to close your eyes again and picture these streams as they were a half millennium ago or so, prior to European colonization in North America and the unregulated commercial trapping of beavers that followed a couple of hundred years later. If our mind's eye could picture this healthy stream, we would likely not be looking at a single thread meandering channel bordered by a buffer of cottonwood trees on both sides. What we'd likely see would be a beaver dam choked hellhole with no place to cast a fly without sinking up to your armpits and getting your line tangled in willows during your back cast. Your waders would be full of holes from all the single bevel beaver cuttings on the face of the dams and along the edge of the water. Your river wouldn't be found in a certain area of the floodplain, but would be the floodplain. Rather than a river corridor, you'd likely see a riverscape with the water taking multiple paths through a web of shallow beaver impounded wetlands. The sediment deposited by glaciers and glacial rivers would be covered by a layer of fine organic sediment, fermenting with a stench so foul that one can even be sure it's not coming from inside their waders. This type of stream would, by no means, have been the rule across the landscapes of the West, but for low gradient streams of unconfined floodplains of the interior, like the Nicola River, this type of riverscape is highly plausible. So beavers were once found across most of North America and Eurasia. Their underfur or felt was prized for its hat-making properties due to its barbs and for being highly water repellent. Eurasian beavers were extirpated from across most of their range by about 1700, This shifted the commercial trapping industry to newly colonized North America, where beavers were also ubiquitous and abundant. As beavers are fairly easy species to trap, population declines in eastern North America due to unregulated trapping became a key driver of European colonization across western North America, as early settlers sought beaver trapping opportunities. With loss of beaver, settlement, agriculture, and urban expansion have led to significant declines in available habitat for beaver. As is seen in many other species of wildlife, beaver habitat loss has led to the species coming into increasing conflict with humans and is often a nuisance to landowners. Like humans, beavers tend to work smarter, not harder. So culverts, bridge abutments, and irrigation ditches are all prime opportunities for a good day or night's work. Right. The loss of beaver engineered landscapes and all the ecosystem services that they provide has naturally led restoration practitioners, and especially those interested in nature-based solutions rather than engineering solutions, to look at partnering with beavers with the hopes of one day having watersheds that function to absorb, cool, and slowly release water throughout the year, while also providing fire resilience and ponds that act as fish factories in producing hordes of baby salmon. Apart from Indigenous oral history, a picture that's lost from our collective memory. If Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi had been speaking directly about beavers, it may have been sung, "You don't know what you had, 'cause it's gone." Unfortunately, a major problem becomes that reality that beavers are not as abundant or ubiquitous as they once were, and many landscapes have become too degraded to support recolonization by beaver. Enter the beaver dam analog. So what is a BDA? These are human-made facsimiles of beaver dams. They're leaky load head dams made of natural materials. They slow the flow of water, allowing sediment to accumulate, and they promote habitat conditions suitable for beaver. Seeing as I only have 10 minutes, I'm going to skip telling you about all of the available and excellent science about BDAs, most of which has been coming out of the Pacific Northwest of the US in the last decade or so. But in the spirit of our current heightened sense of Canadian pride, I'll also note that the first example of beaver-based restoration came from Canada about 100 years ago in the story of Three Against the Wilderness, set in the Chilcotin region of BC. Suffice to say that the science of stream restoration using BDAs was well supported. So after reviewing that science, we decided to go for it. So our site selection was for our first BDA location, we chose Howarth Creek, which is a tributary to Vote Creek in the Coldwater and Nicola River watersheds. It had evidence of beavers historically, but no current colony. The stream was exhibiting signs of degradation typical of post-beaver extirpation, as well as other disturbance types, including bank erosion, down cutting, and loss of wetland vegetation. In order to get ahead of the permitting of this project, we figured we would need engineered design drawings, so we engaged an engineering firm to provide us with a detailed design of a beaver dam, complete with rocks, sticks, and mud. In terms of our permitting, permitting included a notification under Part 3 of the Water Sustainability Regulation, and I have to compliment DFO and the province for coming on board and working together to get this done. I know that the permitting, we're still working through the kinks on that, but in terms of trying this sort of for the first time, they really stepped up, so thankful to them. We also need a compatible use permit for a statutory right-of-way because this was within BC Hydro's transmission line right-of-way.
I will say that was the 10 minutes, but I can give you another 2 minutes if you wanted to just quickly go through the rest of your slides.
Okay, I'm going to. Here we go. So in the fall of 2021, just prior to the atmospheric river, we built 10 BDAs in Howarth Creek. Our contractor was Buck Machines from Nooaitch, and we had NBIT students assist in a couple of the BDAs as well. So here's the pictures of that. I'm going to go really fast here, Erica. I'm going as fast as Zoom will let. Okay, In terms of monitoring, it's mostly been anecdotal, but I spent a fair amount of time up there each year since construction, and the BDA still function well, especially during the spring when the upstream pond is pretty impressive. During lower flows, however, the dams have become more leaky than when first constructed, so it's become apparent that we need the help of beavers if we're going to keep up the maintenance. Okay. 2023 photos here. Okay, so in terms of beaver relocation, we need them to help with the maintenance. So we applied for a General Wildlife Act to live trap and transport the beavers. Project team includes myself, a few other folks from NVIT, Jordan Bryce, Silas Potter, who's an alumni, and Eva Hartman from the Interior Wildlife Rehabilitation Society, who's really important in terms of taking care of these beavers and providing veterinary care. Live trapping was for nuisance beavers only. Traps were checked twice daily. Traps were in contact with the water but not submerged to keep them from overheating. And we tried to move pairs and family groups as much as possible. Okay, so here's an example of two traps we used. On the right is the Coro clam live trap, and on the left is the dam beaver trap made in Saskatchewan. Okay, and both are effective in different situations. Okay, we pit tagged and T-bar ear tagged these beavers using some of the fisheries gear that I had. There we go. We took photos of their tail. We took DNA samples for using mitochondrial DNA for sexing and for future research needs. Noted age and maturity. Again, IWRS took care of them, provided veterinary care while we tried to get family groups back together. There were a lot of soft tissue injuries in the beavers that we captured. And so they took care of those. All beavers were healed of their injuries in 2023. We did have one mortality in 2024. 1 of 5 beavers died. We had the provincial vet do a necropsy, and they couldn't determine the cause of death. Anyways, I'll skip that. It's a photo of the release. Anyway, it's really fun to release these beavers into the ponds. Can you just skip the next slide there for me? Okay, there we go. Post-release monitoring is ongoing. Literature suggests, you'd be lucky if you get half of the beavers sticking around, but we've observed evidence on site of them working on the dams and eating and feeding in the area and building other dams. So just like that. There we go. Thanks to our partners, Nooaitch Band, Interior Wildlife Rehabilitation Society, Fraser Basin Council, NVIT, BC Wildlife Federation, and a whole bunch of other folks who contributed time and effort to this project. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. And sorry for rushing you a little bit
Okay.
at the end there. If anybody has any questions for Tom or for our previous presenter, Wayne, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we can ask them in our next Q&A period. Next, I am happy to welcome our last presenter for this section, another Tom. This one is Tom Balfour. Tom is a biologist with redfish restoration based in Ucluelet, BC. His work focuses on restoration of coastal watersheds impacted by industrial forestry. So Tom Balfour, I will welcome you to turn your camera on and unmute yourself and take it away.
Okay, hello. Is that working? You can see me?
Yep, we can see you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for having me and thanks for listening, everyone. This project is the Shenandoah River Restoration Project. It's been in partnership with Nooaitch Nation and Redfish Restoration Society. I've been working on this particular project for over 10 years, and we've been doing projects together in the territory for over 30. And just kind of run you through some of our trials and tribulations on working on these coastal watersheds. And yeah, take it a little bit different. We want you to talk about beavers in this talk. So, of course, any long-term big project, there's been so many funders and partners that made this all happen, and I don't have time to get into every single one of them, but just know that we're very grateful for anyone who's participated and funded this program. So just to ground you in space here, we're going to take you out of the dry interior to the very west coast of the island. Here we are. We're just east of Ucluelet on the northern wall of Barkley Sound is where the Shenandoah River meets the Pacific Ocean in Nooaitch territory. And so for those unfamiliar with the West Coast, this is what it looks like. It's an incredibly beautiful, remote, rugged part of the world, an incredibly important salmon-bearing part of the world, with thousands of different salmon-bearing creeks bolstered by the immense productivity of the sounds and fjordlands of the West Coast here. But unfortunately, a lot of our watersheds look like this. And I'm gonna have to put this background here to help you understand the problem I'm dealing with. We see a lot of these low-tech projects and beaver projects based on incision recovery. But what I'm dealing with is an overwhelming volume of sediment. And so the logging history here on the West Coast is relatively recent. Kind of 60s and 70s is when the industrial logging really showed up. And that was just a function of where we were. There was big trees yet to log on the mainland and east coast of the island. But when they got here, they were really good, right? And policy really good at taking down trees, and policy had yet to catch up. So you were able to do things like this, where you take do full valley wall removals, cut roads through them, log bank to bank, and this was all above board, as in line with forestry policy at the time. But unfortunately, it resulted in some massive and widespread declines in fish and fish habitat and watershed function overall. And these photos are not from Chinatha, but the problem that we face is this is over and over and over again in almost all of our watersheds on the West Coast, and our organization is dealing with these issues time and time again. So the issues are very similar. Chinatha has these exact same problems, and I just got these better photos to show. But what I want to highlight here is our problem is that the West Coast is a place of extremes, right? We get rain on the order of 4 to 9 meters a year. Our watersheds are steep and short and powerful. Landslides, erosion, big floods is all part of the program. But the balance, the yin to the yang, has always been the giant trees, right? Some of the largest cedars and spruces ever existed grew in these watersheds. And those trees balanced all of this, right? They slowed the rate on which water was uptaked and released into your river. They mitigate or reduce erosion on the banks. They hold colluvial sediments to the hill slopes despite of this big rainfalls. And then when they do fall in, they rack up and make habitat forming jams. And so this is the process we've essentially lost, right? I'm not dealing with agriculture or damming, urban development. It is this complete removal of primary forest from our watersheds and the subsequent unraveling that has followed with that overwhelming volume of sediment, right? These hill slopes collapse, and we just get these massive slugs of poorly sorted colluvial gravels in the river that just move their way down, widening, flattening, wiping out habitat. And as a result, our fish populations has declined. Of course, there's all sorts of other issues in that, but the reason I put this photo in before we get into the project stuff is I don't think a lot of people get time to see intact old growth watersheds and what the log jams would have looked like. So this is one on in the Tokwat River, very nearby to the Chinatha project, and this is an intact river for the most part. And so just showing you, this is one jam, and there's about 4 of these in about 400 meters of where we're standing here. And just the scale and scope, this is what we lost, and this is what, as practitioners, at least in coastal watersheds, what we're trying to restore. So I always kind of keep this in mind when we're thinking about log jam scale. And then, so I'll talk you through our kind of approach as an organization. Like the Chinatha project has been long running, and I can't dive into each and every topic, but I really want to highlight this holistic and top-down approach that we sort of preach in our projects. And that's because for most part, our watersheds, the problems start at the top, right? The river and the fish habitat is just a reflection of everything that's gone on in the upper watershed. And for us, it's just really this legacy of logging and this landslide and inundation. And so we really start anywhere we can. It's much easier to deal with that sediment when it's on the hill slope. So this is just a series of different efforts. The left one is Chinatha there, using willow staking and willow wattle fences, modified brush layers to pin sediment to the mountain and keep it on there. And it's kind of similar concepts, right? We're trying to retain gravel, we're trying to retain moisture, promote vegetation growth, and keep this sediment from moving downstream anymore. We're not trying to limit it, we're just trying to turn off the tap a little bit, right? We have natural slides. Our problem is just too much sediment, too much landslide action. Sorry, my slides are jumping around here. But then jumping into the forest piece. Hopefully that stays still. So our next problem is, so we've completely logged the floodplains, and they are often planted with whatever was valuable at the time, planted at incredible densities. And as a result, 30, 40, 50 years post-logging, our forests still look like this. And this is because they are overstocked, the species are not site appropriate. And so everything's the same age, the same, and the density is far too much, right? We're supposed to be seeing 300 to 400 stems a hectare in an old growth system, but here we're well over 1,000, closer to 2,000. And we know true watershed recovery is going to come from the return of those old growth-like characteristics. So very large trees, complex understories, heterogeneity of species, and stand heights, and all this complexity that will feed the river. And hopefully one day these will be big enough to fall in and rack up and force jams. So this is just topping again, trying to increase stand height complexity, open up gaps. and then planting, trying to get some diversity going. And so those tactics we applied to almost every project in different scales and scopes. And after the last 10 years at Chinatha, we've done just that. So we've done 1 large-scale landslide stabilization. We've done 2 full-on road crossing deactivations. We've done about 24 hectares of riparian and floodplain silviculture, and we've worked in about almost 2 kilometers of linear channel restoration actions. And then another cool part is this is rebuilding an extirpated run of chum. This is a chum, coho, steelhead cutthroat system. All populations have been in massive decline. The chum have been completely extirpated. And so we've been working with some really modern hatchery practices and really heavily genetics based and all these other pieces trying to rebuild this run that I can't get into right away, or at least in the time we're allotted here. So I'll talk about our PAL project. This was 2024. Like I said, I've been working in this watershed for over 20 years. And we are sort of moving beyond, like I really try and preach this, all good restoration projects never really end. Our partners, our Indigenous partners have driven home that this is a 1,000-year project. And hopefully one day we just kind of switching over to monitoring and maintenance and fishing. But today we're a little bit further along. We are kind of in this like tweaking and testing phase. Using wood treatments to promote habitat complexity and all sorts. So this is our site selection piece. This is the relative elevation model of the site. You can see the ocean on the right, and then the different tributaries coming together going up the left of the image. And this is really common in West Coast systems. They're very short and steep. Our floodplain pockets are quite discrete. They're often very close to the ocean. So it helps with our project site identification. But it's also really tricky with your habitat restoration because there is very few sites where you can have an impact. And it's also, the fish populations are extra sensitive of this because we have like 1 or 2 of these floodplain pockets that can be easily wiped out by a single event. And so, yeah, again, we look for places where we can have the most response, the big flat floodplains. We're going to drive flow out into that floodplain and promote some complexity. And so our tool of choice for this project is the PALs. In the past, there's been a lot of traditional cable boulder structures in here, which I have some pretty strong feelings about the effectiveness and the utility of those. We're not doing that. We've moved over to PALs. And so the problem here is we're not getting that natural root recruitment because the trees are all sort of the same age and size class. So actually with this project, we're pairing it with our riparian silviculture. So we're doing a bunch of thinning and topping, which generated the materials to then be used in the PALs. Of course, you leave a bunch on the floor for that coarse woody debris, but whenever we can, we would tip a tree or fall it to form the root of that PAL, and then use the extra slash and everything to pin it together. And so that's what we did. We built, in this project, we built 14 PALs. And this was a bit of a test project for us. We've done PALs in much smaller creeks before. This is definitely the largest. And we're really just trying to work PALs into our toolkit, right? We build log jams of all sizes, right up to 100 tree engineered log jams to, very small accretions like this and smaller. So we're using 8-foot, 4-inch posts there. Most of these logs are at least rooted on the bank at some point and then filled in with the slash. A little video to show, really trying to get aggressive, right? We know that true geomorph response comes when you block up 50 to 75% of your channel. So we're really trying to do that. These are placed closely together. They're blocking up. We're trying to get at least half the channel in our projection. And we're trying to get them pretty dense and really trying to promote that response. I'm trying to scour up gravel, but I'm also trying to trap and store gravel. Trying to get water out in the floodplain, all the other things we've talked about. Again, here's one of those cable boulder structures, and not to trash talk these things too much, but we do have this problem in BC. They were great at the time, the early practitioners messing around with things, the concept was right. But my pet peeve right now is that a lot of people are still using these designs from the 90s and they're kind of gross and ineffective. So in this project, I've been slowly cutting them out, but we didn't want to waste that wood. We used them as key pieces for our PALs, cut the cable, pull the boulders, and then fill in with the slash and get that mass you can get from a PAL. Cover those things up. And again, just embracing that size and messiness. Almost done.
All right.
And yeah, these things had some big flows this winter, a couple atmospheric rivers. They've withstood. They've scoured pools. They started to collect organic debris. It's been really cool watching them evolve. And yeah, that's kind of it. And then my last just thought, one of my favorite parts about this low-tech work is the inclusion of people. Some of our other projects have gotten larger and more technical and more expensive, but they involve less people power. And these PALs have been amazing for connecting people back to the river, creating jobs, and getting their hands on in the river, and having a big effect without making a big mess that we used to do with machines and excavators And yeah, that's the end of the project. This is actually a chum running up into some of the restoration project from earlier this year. Super cool to have seen them coming back over in small bits over the 10 years we've been looking at this place. So thanks, everyone. That's the talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you to all three of our presenters for this past section. Alana, I'll have you stop sharing your screen now, and we'll move into our next Q&A session. So I will remind everybody, if you do want to pose a question to any of the past three presenters, please submit them into the Q&A box. Right now, we don't have a ton of questions in there yet, but hopefully they'll come through quickly. I do have one question that came in to the chat. This is from Brad. Brad asked, what are the key differences for small streams between streams that are affected by logging and streams that are not affected by logging? And is water quantity a key difference? I think this would probably be, this came in during Tom Balfour's presentation.
So is it water quality was the question, is the difference? Or
Yeah,
quantity?
I can repeat the question. I don't think I actually read it very well. What are the key differences for small streams between streams that are affected by logging and streams that are not affected by logging? And is water quality a key difference between those two?
In my experience, working on streams of all sizes impacted by logging, the problems seem to show themselves in very similar ways. It's very repetitive. What happens when you get this massive volume of sediment? Water quality is not something we've seen a massive difference. Quantity for sure, like we have this buried stream problem where you get a massive load of sediment in your stream and it actually buries the flow subsurface because you have this coarse angular stuff. And so that smaller streams seem to be more susceptible for like full disconnections and burials. And then just from the restoration perspective and the recovery piece, the nice thing about small streams is the smaller second growth trees are more effective sooner at forming habitat. On our bigger streams, we're waiting 800-900 years for those truly monumental trees to form and fall back in. So yeah, there is the scale of the structures we're building and the timelines do change with the size of the stream, but I find the impacts and the solutions very similar, just different scales.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let's see what questions we have here in our Q&A. We have a question for Tom Wilms from Dave. He said, maybe they missed it, but how have the introduced beavers been liking their new home? Are there signs they have been maintaining the built structures?
They're not doing as they're told. They've got a mind of their own, and obviously they see things differently than we do. As much as we try to make these, solutions look natural, there's evidence of some of the beavers working on the dams, some mud pushing up on the edges of some of the dams and things like that. They're definitely feeding in the area. I've set out some cameras with some scent traps to just to monitor whether they're there or not. But right away, some of our first beavers that we released immediately started building a dam just a little further upstream from our most upstream dam in our system there, which is fine. They're going to do what they're going to do. And I think even, some of the work that was being cited around Bridge Creek, those beavers that got in the John Day watershed there, those beavers that got released or working the system, they were building on BDAs and they were building other dams and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's mixed success, I guess, but yeah, that's helpful. Yeah.
Great.
No telemetry work either. So the pit tags that we were using are just an RFID tag. So you actually have to scan the tag in order to get there which individual it is. You can set up mobile arrays, but we haven't done that. So more for recaptures. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. This is a question for Wayne. How do you communicate with farmers and landowners the goal of moistening fields as a co-benefit of slowing and widening flows versus the risk of beaver activity flooding fields? Or what is the threshold of moisture that you're aiming for?
Well, I think first of all, we have to ensure that we're picking the right spots on the right fields in order to do this. Obviously, if it's lowland fields adjacent to it, we want to avoid it. So we have taken an approach of looking for the gullies, the non-arable portions on the farms and ranches at this point. We do have, you saw one of the pictures there, the objective was originally when agricultural leases were given out to clear from corner post to corner post, cultivate 80% of the arable. And so they did that, and then they got private land designation on it. I think the drought again has given us that opportunity to interact with them. We certainly have our regional district, local mayors intrigued with what we're doing. And we actually have the Minister of Agriculture scheduled to come up and look at this. So we're working with fish. Fish are the impetus for doing this, but we also see an opportunity to work with agriculture on non-perennial streams, that streams that maybe don't provide fish habitat to do it. So picking the right person, picking the right farm and ranch, picking the right spot on the fields really sets us up for successes. One bad failure will collapse us really quickly. It's a small community, even though it's the second largest agricultural belt. Bad stuff passes faster than good stuff. So we're careful at this point. And truly, this is year one of the BDA program. We've been around for 18 years doing it in a much different sort of a way, with different objectives, crush culverts with bridges, replace, that type of a thing. But yeah, it's early days for us. Being informative with the ranching community in every way you can is really the key to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Looking at the time, we have about 2 minutes left before we're going to move to our next break. So I am going to likely just be able to ask one more question. Let's see. I will send this one to, I believe, Tom Balfour. This is from Amanda. Have you found any efficient and highly effective storage solutions for sediment through these systems? If anybody else thinks that might be for them as well, you're welcome to speak to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's this endless push and pull we're working with. We're trying to move sediment through the system or trap and store. And it really, the solution has been these structures themselves. A long time ago, we played around with like sumps and excavating them over the years. But it's really been get a bunch of structure going, get your sediment sorted and trapped, and then pin it down with vegetation is usually our program. Get a big structure out in the middle of the channel, get an island forming behind it, and then plant the crap out of it and try and pin that material down. But again, having enough structure that you're also moving sediment through your system as well and trapping it where you can. But it seems to come back to log jams always, and the more the better. But that vegetation piece, getting your islands to form, has been our approach.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, this actually might leave time for one. I might hold off on this until our final question period. So I will put a pause on questions for now. There are still a few more questions in the Q&A, and if anybody does have any more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we can bring them to our speakers during the final question period, or perhaps our speakers can type out answers in the box. For now, we are going to go on another short break. This one is just going to be 5 minutes. So we'll see everybody back here at 11:05, where we're going to start getting some regulators' perspectives on low-tech process-based restoration. So yeah, I will see everybody back here at 11:05. The theme for this last and final section is the regulator's perspective. So to start, we are going to be joined again by Jen Rogers here from the BC Wildlife Federation. Unfortunately, the DFO, or Department of Fisheries and Oceans, was not able to join us today. However, Jen is going to relay some advice from the DFO on applications and key considerations for LTPBR projects. So Alana, if you want to switch through to the next slide, and maybe Alana, why don't you just switch the slides for Jen? She can tell you when to switch.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. Yeah, I just want to reemphasize that I am not with DFO, but we have been given permission to relay some of this information to the broader group. But there is kind of the caveat that the things that we'll be talking about, they really want the proponent to be considering when planning their project that some of this is not necessarily requirements, but that this is the type of information that might be requested by DFO when reviewing projects involving BDAs. So again, this is not an exhaustive or prescriptive list, but just kind of things to be thinking about. Perfect. So DFO, the restoration practitioners within DFO are kind of in the early stages of developing LTPBR guidance internally with the goal of eventually releasing something to the public. So what will be shared in these following slides, again, is not an exhaustive list and is not intended to be prescriptive. But one of the questions we asked was, what are you looking for in applications and when might these projects be a concern to DFO? And so this was some of the advice that we were given in relation to that. Firstly, they really want proponents to be aware that LTPBR might be perceived as easy or simple, but these projects still need to be well planned, designed, and implemented by qualified and experienced practitioners in order to be effective. The site selection should be careful, strategic, and based on suitability. So it shouldn't be perceived as an effective restoration tool in all scenarios, which is definitely something we've touched on earlier in this webinar. Something else DFO kind of wants to focus on is, or practitioners to focus on, is that there should be clear objectives and metrics of success, which kind of fall under a monitoring criteria. So what are your goals and how will they be measured? Some other questions we asked, what are some of the key regulatory considerations for LTPBR projects in relation to kind of under DFO's scope of practice. And they have told us to really consider the species and life stages of fish present within the watercourse and any potential impacts, whether they be permanent or temporary, both during and following construction. We've also asked they want us to think about how fish passage is being considered and addressed. There could be different considerations for systems with anadromous or non-anadromous species. DFO also suggested that flow gauging stations could be used to provide a comparison of flows pre and post construction. And ideally, there would be 1 year of pre-construction flow data for a comparison with post-construction flows throughout the calendar year. And DFO would want to ensure that the structures are not resulting in reduced flows downstream. So that kind of relates back to some of the other points that they were talking about. And further to this, information on the expected amount of time for the area upstream of the structures to fully charge and restore base flow downstream once the structures are complete should be provided. So essentially, after you build a structure, how long will it take to fill up with water and kind of continue the flow downstream is what they were asking for there. They were also made a note of considering when these works are taking place. So timing windows are important, but drought conditions are often present during timing windows in recent years. And so these could be exacerbated moving forward. So constructing these features during or immediately prior to periods of water surplus might be considered in certain circumstances. So this would need to also, again, consider the species and life stages of fish potentially impacted and would need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, that's kind of the general advice that was relayed. But if anybody has kind of specific project related questions, kind of the best avenue to go through is doing a request for project review submitted to DFO. And they will be able to give you a bit more of like a formal response with kind of the specifics of that project in mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. And with that federal perspective, we're going to shift over to provincial perspective. So I would like to welcome Patrick Farmer and Jennifer Bishop from the Ministry of Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship. Patrick is a professional agrologist and forester that works for the province within the Ministry of Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship. Patrick has worked in the water allocation team with WLRS for 12 years, protecting and managing water, and is currently the section head of allocation for the Thompson-Okanagan region. Jennifer is a senior authorization specialist with the province in the Ministry of Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship, who works primarily on permitting under the Water Sustainability Act across the Kootenay region. Jennifer is a professional agrologist and is passionate about protecting water resources and the restoration of degraded stream environments. So I will hand it over to Patrick and Jennifer for this final presentation before we head into our last Q&As.
All right, thanks, Erica. Hopefully folks can hear me. I will attempt to advance the slides. I want to say that I've just been really impressed with the discussion thus far and really honored to be here. A couple of the really good things that I heard from all the work that's being done across the province and elsewhere. I really heard what Wayne was talking about with site selection being really key, as well as collaborating with folks that work in that watershed or live in that watershed. I think those are really good things to do, and will really ensure that these projects are successful into the future. I think I'm gonna try not to zoom too far ahead, but oh, there we go. So we've skipped a slide, or did we?
I think you might be going backwards.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
There
Okay.
you go.
Oh, permitting process. So a couple different options that exist. We've down here in the Thompson-Okanagan region, we've got a project that was done on our water license that was done on private land. You guys got to see one of the Section 11 projects in Spies Creek. And I would say that the vast majority of projects across the province are following this permitting process, the Section 11s. And then the notification one is probably a lot more rare, just based on the folks that are doing the projects. I do know that there is some work afoot to kind of, we want to be efficient in our authorizations, and there is some work out there to see how we can improve this. Jen, you want to talk about the elements of a successful application?
You bet. Thanks, Patrick. So over the last year or so, we've really been receiving an uptick in applications for this type of restoration technique. And across those applications, we've seen a wide range in the quality and the type of information provided by applicants to support their projects. So I'm going to walk us through some of the basic elements that we find make a successful application, but by no means is this an exhaustive list. So similar to DFO, we really like to see clear project goals. So to be able to answer questions like, what issue is the project looking to address? What parameters will be measured to detect change and improvement in the system? What would look like success on this project? We'd like to answer those questions. In terms of project design, projects that follow published guidance and literature for low-tech process-based restoration are strongly encouraged. We recognize there's a huge body of knowledge that has been generated from thousands of BDAs, PALs, and other low-tech restoration using these techniques in the United States. So we're not starting from the beginning here in BC. So we really encourage applicants to incorporate this guidance and knowledge within their projects. For site selection, general advice is sites which have little potential to affect existing land use, existing infrastructure, cultural values, and water rights are going to be strongly preferred. And I found the low-tech process-based restoration of riverscapes guidebook has a pretty good screening tool that can help practitioners with this initial site selection to see what might be appropriate for their project. We also look for a strong understanding of the system that you're proposing to work in, its hydrology, its ecology, and the existing values in any area that could potentially be affected by the project. We're very interested to know if there are beaver already in the system you're proposing to work in and how that might change your project over time. In general, a successful application also includes some good maps and calculations that assesses the potential for the dam structures to fail. So we as the regulator do need to understand what area could potentially be affected in some worst case scenarios that the structures break and release a whole bunch of water. We are also finding that successful applications provide us with a really clear monitoring and maintenance plan. So we'd like to understand what situations, what types, and what times of the year that you intend to do maintenance in the stream on your structures. We also look for a clear plan and commitments for monitoring of the structures during their lifetime in order to inform that maintenance. And then the other piece I wanted to touch on was we're finding some really good applications provide us with great commitments to follow best management practices for in-stream work and provide appropriate mitigation measures for the project outlined in an environmental management plan. This type of plan can really give us a good understanding of what type of work is going to occur and how the environment will be protected through the work. So it's recommended for these kind of lower risk projects where we aren't super close to infrastructure or potentially affecting water rights, that those are supported by at least one qualified professional. Often an RP bio might step into that role. Higher risk proposals, if we're looking at larger water storage or proposals that we are abutting up against infrastructure, those would likely require the support of further qualified professionals such as hydrologists or professional engineers. And with that, I'll flip it back to you, Pat.
Yeah, so I really want to emphasize that these projects, at least here in BC, are still, I think, evolving. I think everybody can acknowledge that as well. And along with that, the regulatory piece and the regulators will have to evolve with them. I think every project is different. It's not as simple as saying, okay, well, this is a water license one and this is a section 11 one, and this is how maintenance is going to look here versus monitoring there. Even within the projects within our own watershed here, and Tom talked about some, and Jen talked about some, like they are different from one another, and so the pathways for authorization are probably going to be different as well. As Jen said, the applications can vary different, like very widely in terms of their complexity, and then as well as like how are they changing the hydrology of the stream. I would say that monitoring and maintenance plans are still evolving. I know we've had good chats with BC Wildlife Federation about their own maintenance and monitoring plans, and I think we can all agree that we're still learning on when maintenance should be required, when can it be done, what does monitoring look like, what kind of monitoring can be really effective and tell us more about the story. So I would say that it really is still evolving, and then we're even learning about some of these other pieces, like I've got on there about the additional authorizations, and like a section 11 or a water license doesn't give you the ability to plant trees as part of that project. That's a different permit that you may have to go out and get if you're really hoping to plant trees in the site or build fences to exclude cattle and stuff like that. I would say that the spectrum of where people are at, I think for the most part, people want these out on the landscape, and they want to see these restoration tools put in place. There is still some reservation from some folks that I know that I work with about, just, the liability around them. Our dam safety folks are often reminding us about orphan dams and projects that can have really good intentions and then get left out there and they turn into something less desirable. And then who's left to deal with that? But I think the more of these we can get on the landscape, the better it will be for practitioners, builders, regulators, everybody involved, because we're learning from every single project and every single site. Again, as Jen mentioned, knowing more about the floodplain and some of that, what Tom said about the beaver information is a great asset to have because it really helps us understand what's the potential success for the project. And First Nations, at least the ones that I talk to, support these, but they still want to be part of project. They want monitoring to be carried out, and they really want to be informed when these are landing on their traditional territories.
That's all we've got for you. I've got a couple resources up on the screen here. These are general resources that we suggest to proponents to use when planning projects. So our requirements and best management practices for changes in and about a stream. And then we've got regional terms and conditions. So each region has got some separate advice to give in terms of in-stream projects. And then we do lean strongly on these resources from the US, the low-tech process-based restoration of riverscapes design manual, the beaver restoration guidebook. And we've learned a ton from exploring projects on the low-tech restoration explorer too.
Yeah, so hopefully that gives folks some more specific information. I know that not having DFO here is a challenge. And then the stuff that I saw in their slides was very general, and I don't know how helpful it really is for folks to kind of visually do that out on the landscape. But I think that the pieces here that Jen has put really will help folks. If you're following these things, then your applications can be met with open arms.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick and Jennifer. That was fantastic. Alana, I don't know, can you pull up the agenda slide one more time for me? Great, thank you. So we are in this third Q&A period, which is questions and answers for our regulators. So if you do have any questions for Jennifer and Patrick, please do submit them to the Q&A box. And then after that, we were going to move into just a general question and answer period. Right now, I'm not seeing too many questions specifically for our regulators in the Q&A. I'll give it a second to see if any of those come in. I do see a note here from Brad, I think, which is, I believe, to you, Patrick and Jennifer, just saying thank you, that Brad is working on a project which requires reconnecting the water table to a small stream affected by sediment buildup and beaver dam complexes. We are planning BDAs to connect the stream to the water table, but as well, we want to re-expose the spawning gravels for salmon. This actually may be for one of our previous speakers as well. But yeah, if nobody has any questions for specific to the regulators, we can move to, oh, let me scroll down for a second. I didn't scroll down. Okay, I do have a question here. Oh, they're all coming in. Everything's coming in now. So this is from Carrie. Since these BDAs and PALs are meant to be leaky and eventually become part of natural processes, which can include natural breaching, how is that viewed by the province?
Well, maybe I'll go first. I think Tom did a really good job of describing why these things are good and why we want them out there. And how much our systems are missing these types of things. And again, I think the provincial view is that we would really like to see these return. We just don't want some of the negative impacts that can come with large beaver dam failures. And unfortunately, you know, when you're talking to folks in the dam safety world, a lot of those folks are your first responders to these events. So they can kind of see sort of when things really go wrong, and that's the lens they can see the world from. For Jenny and I, it's simply about making sure that people are not being impacted by them, and infrastructure is not being impacted by them, and the environment is being impacted in a good way, which again, I think for the most part, that's really what we're seeing, and support that. Yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. Jenny, anything to add?
I think you really nailed it, Patrick. The only thing to add really is, you know, those natural processes, like you said, we want to encourage that. We see the value in it. We see strong value in these projects, and to kind of manage that, the risk side of the natural breaching is where I really encourage folks to pick low risk sites where we aren't, you know, right up against things that could have those negative effects that our dam safety folks are worried about.
Yeah, great point.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, the next question I will pose to you both is from Kirsten. How do regulators view goals and objectives around grading incised streams and increasing floodplain connectivity versus storing water?
I don't know if we really view them differently. I think the challenge is that the legislation might view it differently, and isn't specific enough to kind of find that gray area to work in. You know, if you just read the Water Sustainability Act, you can't store water with a change approval. Like, there's not a quantity, it's a zero. So we've had to try to figure out ways to operate in the Section 11 world, even when we are storing water, even if it's not very much, but we want to store water. Again, going back to what Wayne's saying with drought, and a big reason why we're supportive of BDAs down here in the Thompson Okanagan is that we recognize that we need to reactivate the floodplain, get that groundwater, surface water connectivity piece going, store water high up in our valleys, slow it down, so that we are not talking about drought level 4 and 5 every August.
Jennifer, did you want to add anything?
No, I've got nothing to add there. Thanks, Patrick, for that answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, what else do we have here? This is a question from Catriona. How much specific information is needed about the fisheries for each application? This may be more of a DFO question, but
I can take a general stab at it. I was just typing out a response, but again, I'm not with DFO, but I think it would be pretty site specific. But at the very least, what at least we've been doing for our projects is we include like a list of species that has the potential to use that restoration reach. And then when you're doing some monitoring, making note of like pre-restoration monitoring, making note of what species you actually see using the area, and maybe depending on what kind of the objectives of your project are, documenting some of the habitats that are currently present. And then once you have like the species of fish that could be there, also including what time of year they could use or pass through the reach would be really useful for DFO, I think. And then if there's like any really sensitive species, DFO could ask for more information, but that would probably be, it would be good to submit a DFO request for project review where they have like the avenue to kind of clarify some of those things with you.
I know from speaking recently with one of the provincial habitat officers, it is certainly project specific how much information we might seek. If there's species at risk suspected to be in the stream, then we're going to be at the higher level of information requirements. But if it's simply a matter of assuming fish are present in some situations, if we don't have a ton of information, then we lean more heavily on our applicants to provide sufficient mitigation measures to manage for fish in the system, and may not necessarily require a full habitat survey off the bat if it's a lower risk site.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have a question here from Sarah. Is there a line in the regulatory world between storing water and slowing water?
I don't know.
I'll let you go on that, Patrick.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to pass that one over. That's such a great way to put it. You know, so I would say the answer is no. You know, the way storage licenses work for the most part in the province is they're all just slowing water. We have very few people that store water indefinitely and impound it and not release it. Storage licenses very much are about slowing water, catching it in the spring and slowly releasing it throughout the summer for irrigation or conservation flow, or to generate hydro. Like that's just sort of what we do. So it's always slowing water. It just feels a lot more like storing because they're big concrete structures doing the work versus natural braided, willowed BDAs.
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything there. That's a great answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We were definitely putting you on the spot here with some of these questions. We do have 2 more questions specific to regulators in the Q&A. If anybody does have any more regulator specific questions, please submit those. This one is from Kurt. How many LWD projects are typically received?
Well, I can only speak so for the Thompson Okanagan, I think we had 3 in the Merritt area last year, a few more in the Kamloops area, and I think there's at least 1 or 2 going on in the Okanagan. So I wouldn't say a ton, but like Jenny brought up, we have seen, you know, that's from 0 the year before. So there are more, and I know there's projects in the north, which we got to see with Wayne's presentation. And Jenny, how many of you guys got out in the Kootenays this past year?
They're still coming in, so it's kind of a dynamic question, but I'd imagine for last year and this year, probably an average of about 7 to 10 per year.
Yeah, with the expectation that we expect to see more into the future, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And hopefully by the time those big waves come, we've got it all sort of ironed out, and it's just good applications coming in and just good BDAs going out.
That's the dream.
Great. Okay, so this question is from Rachel, and I'm going to see if I can read it in a way that makes sense. For the water license, does 1 license per PID, which Rachel said meaning 1 parcel of land, work, or does a license have to physically fall within the work area? They have a water license for their BC park that they work in, but the wetlands are going adjacent within the park.
Yeah, so I would say that there's no requirement for 1 water license per PID. Maybe there's an opportunity to amend the water license that is there to include more of the project area. You know, we have water licenses that have 100 PIDs on them or parcels of land. So it's not so much about that. It's more about the water license covering the project itself and you know, what's the water being used for from that aspect, I would say. Jenny, anything to?
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. Whatever water license you have, Rachel, will be specific to a purpose and a water amount. So we could only amend a water license to keep that same water amount or less. So as long as you have enough water in your water license for your storage, etc., then likely you could apply for an amendment.
Awesome, thank you. All right, our next question, how does the province acknowledge that these projects are implemented by NGOs? So things like long-term maintenance requirements are difficult for NGOs with limited funds and short time frames.
I can jump in on that one. Here in the Kootenays, we are very sensitive to that fact, and we really want to see them out on the landscapes. We do our best to work with proponents with the budget that they have. We're seeing a lot of projects that get funding for 3 years. So we generally don't commit our proponents for an authorization longer than 3 years, as long as we have a solid understanding with them what will happen at the end of the authorization when they no longer have funding.
Great answer.
All right, I'll take that as you don't have anything else to add, Patrick. Awesome. So we have one last question that's sort of regulator related and also is about one of our speakers as well. This is from Michelle, and one of the speakers mentioned 10,000 centimeter cubic could be stored with their permit, otherwise they would need a water license. I believe that was Jess Holden's from Jess Holden's presentation. Maybe Michelle here is asking if someone could clarify if that is a general standard or not.
I can speak to that one too. So like Pat mentioned, storing water without a water license isn't necessarily within the Water Sustainability Act, but we are enabling projects under Section 11 approvals in order to get them out on the landscape. Where we can't really go beyond our bounds with a Section 11 is for large water storage, or even certain heights of dams as well would be included on that. So 10,000 meters cubed is a water storage amount that comes from the dam safety regulations. So once you're proposing to store that amount of water, you are going outside of the Water Sustainability Act into another regulation, which requires regulation. So we generally would never consider something that large under a Section 11. That would go to a water license for consideration with strong referral to the dam safety section, and it would be some sort of regulated dam under their regulation.
Yeah, I think Jenny really gave a great answer there. The only thing I would add is just coming back to that storage piece, like we've really tried to get these projects out on land base, recognizing that for the most part, they're storing very small quantities of water or slowing the water down. And so we've kind of tried to live in that space as best we can, but the 10,000 cubes is really about the dam safety regs and it becoming a regulated dam. And that's a much trickier place. It really, Jen and I don't have much to do with it. You're now working with dam safety officers and engineer drawings and all those types of things. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been, I'm sure everybody's found it incredibly valuable to gain some of your perspectives on these topics. With that, I'm going to move into more general questions for our final Q&A period. So I will invite all of our speakers to turn their cameras off, and I'll invite all of our attendees to pose any questions to any of our speakers that we've had for over the past 2.5 hours. I do have a few that I will start with, and we'll see if any more roll in after that. So this first question is from Kurt, and it is a question for Wayne. You mentioned that you trapped juvenile Chinook upstream of your BDA. Does this indicate that adult Chinook passed post-BDA installation or pre-BDA installation, and juveniles were using the BDA for rearing?
Yeah, almost the 70–80% of our 32 streams are non-natal streams. They are nursery streams, class 5 and 6, 4, 5, and 6 there. So they're small, prone to the drought issue that is there. We started an environmental DNA program 4 years ago. We will have at the end of next week 4 years of published data on our news site. That eDNA has really allowed us to understand where fish are, where the best values are. And I think we've changed our thinking over the last 20 years, where one time we thought we could restore a stream from stem to stern, and now we see the value is really at the bottom end. I think it's just an adaptation to the climate issues that are there. We haven't done any BDAs on any of our streams that are spawning, and I think I'd be a little frightened, I'd like to understand better how the heck we're going to do this. Our one BDA that you saw there was quite large. We actually are going to put a fish ladder into it. We've built it into it along with a pond leveler. As much to demonstrate that this can work, we want to monitor that aspect and learn. This is a new trip for us, a new journey for us too, period. And we just want to make sure that we're on side. This is about fish. And so if we're blocking fish from getting there, or they're not getting out of the system, then what's the good of what we're doing, and how do we adapt to that?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I also have some more general questions that perhaps might be good for Sam or Alex. Jen Rogers was wondering, when and how often do you typically do maintenance on your structures?
I guess I can start, and then Alex, maybe you can chime in, but we do maintenance on our structures pretty often. So when we start a LTPBR project, we might be looking at whatever our funding constraints are. So in that example of having funding for 3 years, we would recommend implementing a pilot phase, getting some structures in that first season, and then coming back in the second year, implementing a second phase, maintaining those structures, really taking your lessons learned. Every stream is unique, and you might be able to learn more effective techniques that really fit those site-specific conditions by implementing multiple phases throughout the year. So if your funding is available for 3 years, we take a phased approach and would come back for maintenance every year for as long as our funding allows, and kind of partition that budget out in a way that allows multiple phases of maintenance.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to remember that, we're trying to mimic these structures that beaver create, and for them, it's very process-based. Every night they're maintaining them, and we come in and we, assemble these BDAs in a couple of hours and hope for the best. And so if you can incorporate coming back, sometimes that's trying to tag and overlap project areas like Sam was mentioning. And if there's anything I could pass on to folks in British Columbia as this is developing further, is to learn from some of the hindrances that a lot of our regulators and funders go through, is that they want to see new phases and they want to see new reaches be restored. But if there's anything that has come from these large scale watershed experiments, is that maintenance is fundamental for keeping up the momentum. And sometimes a lot of these streams are so degraded that it's not just a one and done treatment. It's multiple. So yeah, the answer to like when should you do maintenance is just yes.
Awesome, thank you. And on the same topic of when, there's also a question for you, Sam and Alex, around when you construct your projects and if you're required to follow a fish window or a fish work window, and so what time is best to build.
So I work a lot on the permitting side down here in our western states, and most of the streams that we are working in do have anadromy, and so we are looking at in-stream windows. Typically, projects are falling between a July 15th and September 30th window, but it does depend on which species we have present and kind of that scale of the project. So we are working with lots of folks on that permitting side to kind of expand some of those windows in projects where we might not have anadromy or whatever species it is we're managing for. But generally, we are looking at a field season that perfectly coincides with fire season. And so, as we are working with our permitters, that's something we really try to keep in perspective. July and August are becoming increasingly challenging as our states warm to actually get in there and implement because of fire. So working with folks and kind of having that collaborative conversation on what might be realistic for crews, funding, in-stream windows, whatever species we're managing for, takes a lot of discussion.
Awesome. Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? No? All right. Okay, we have a question in the Q&A from Peter, and it's asking if there are general guidelines for stream power or gradient for PALs, and what is the general limit for stream power for PAL focused projects, and has this been quantified? He's curious about this experience from Anabranch projects.
Yeah, maybe I could start, and I think it's difficult, and I think we're still learning a lot. At Utah State, we have the Bear River Range running behind the school, and if you go about 20 minutes up the road into the range, you can find these 2-meter high beaver dams that are 30 meters across and a 5% gradient stream. And that basically breaks all of the rules in the guidebooks and recalibrates what's possible. But I think for a lot of the PAL-centric projects, we're trying to maximize the zone of impact by implementing structures. And the higher gradient that you have kind of dictates the size of the bars that are deposited and the depth of the pools. And from my own research in the Asotin Creek intensively monitored watershed, the lower gradient streams, like the North Fork, at 2% can develop bars that are much larger and longer and foster aggradation that can force the activation of side channels that sometimes run for hundreds of meters. Whereas the more steeper and more narrow reaches and some of the smaller streams, they're still able to collect nice spawning gravels and develop riffles and at a much higher density of geomorphic unit exchanges. But spatially, the impacts are much lower and usually constricted to what we just refer to as a bankful width up and downstream, that radius. And so I think we haven't found the upper limit is maybe one short answer, but there's always higher priority areas and lower priority areas. And if there's one thing that I also want to get across too is that I think in this webinar there were a lot of streams that were pretty smaller order streams in these big meadow systems that are just perfect for BDAs to spread the water laterally, and that reduces stream power at higher flow stages. But I think it would be a great opportunity to start integrating some of this work with the post-assisted log structures and larger streams that range 1.5 to 3% gradient, and start to use the large woody debris in the main channel. And once you start to develop a multi-threaded network, integrating BDAs into that, because sometimes I think we read the manual or Pollock's guidebook on what's practical and what streams. But beavers break the rules all the time, and sometimes over multiple years, we can integrate more of these techniques into a wider range of stream systems. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question, or if you had anything to add, anyone really, but.
Awesome, thank you. I believe that question was from Peter. So if Peter does have any follow-ups, you're welcome to put those into the Q&A or send a comment into the chat as well. For now, I do see just one more question in the Q&A from Kurt. In terms of planting beaver forage to encourage beaver colonization post-installation, how many BDA practitioners have used the water jet stinger approach to plant willows?
We certainly do in our new society. We started off with them and thought it was quite a good creation. One of the challenges, though, when we're working during drought, is we actually don't have enough water to run the hydraulic, get the hydraulic action that we want, and so that we switched to machine planting. So we use a small excavator, simply grab a foothold of terra firma, put the willows in underneath, pat it down, and move on through that. We've overplanted with cottonwoods using natural planting techniques, and we plan on continue on doing that kind of planting over the next 3 years, even adding some conifers into it for the shade values that we need. Certainly low density, but just add to that complexity and add to that opportunity to capture snow, reduce wind, reduce the drying effect that is there. So the stingers work really good if you have that water source, but they certainly are problematic in a drought in some areas.
Awesome, thanks, Wayne. Were there any other practitioners who wanted to weigh in on the water jet stinger?
I think there's two really important, both in the US and Canada, in terms of information. Chris Hogue with the USDA, he's got a lot of information around planting willows, red osier dogwood, and cottonwood for restoration projects. And then Dave Polster in BC, probably a lot of you folks know him. It looks like, yeah, there was some of those slope stabilization techniques being used in that last presentation by the other Tom. Those are, yeah, if you Google both of those names, you'll get lots of resources, but just make sure you're getting those cuttings. If you're using cuttings, get them below the summer water table, just so that they don't dry out. Would be a key thing we learned from our projects. And even using, not necessarily the water jet, but just using a vibratory post pounder like you would use for putting in fence posts. That'll make a nice hole for cuttings and things like that, as long as you get it nice and deep.
Awesome, thank you so much, Wayne and Tom Wilms. I have two more questions right now. One, Jen Rogers sent a question through to me about, this is for Sam and Alex, about using LTPBR in a post-fire scenario. How quickly have you been able to pull together project elements to get structures in the ground in a timely manner?
I think that's a really great question. And the post-fire projects, I think, are some of our favorites. Alex's study is actually in a post-fire watershed, which is really interesting to look at. We are seeing in those post-fire projects really rapid aggradation of our stream channels. So if we're looking at a incised system that we want to reaggrade and get out on the floodplain, you just have this amazing window of opportunity to be able to get in there and have a really accelerated restoration trajectory post-fire. So it's a super interesting thing to think about. And we have actually been able to work with some of our regulators in projects on getting the permitting processes through faster. I think a lot of folks recognize that window of opportunity and that high sediment load that can occur in a post-fire watershed area. So yeah, those are some of our favorite projects to work on. And I'm sure, Alex, you probably have some comments on that one too.
Yeah, no, I think You brought up the good point. There's a geomorphic window of, 1 to 4 years where there's a much more vulnerable runoff condition with wildfire and sediment delivery. And so it's really important if you are going to try to leverage post-fire with low-tech process-based restoration to get that early as possible to hone in the most benefits. And so developing relationships with regulators, like Sam was saying. But I think something else that I also like to just bring up is how, many folks in this webinar talked about some of the synergy with different stakeholders. And we've had really great benefits, or beneficial relationships with other contractors that are doing fuels reductions around some of the communities local to our project areas. And, they just stack these slash piles 10 meters high, and then somebody's got to go and supervise the burn. And if we say, hey, give us some of that slash, we'll create spectacular habitat for endangered fish. That's a really great synergy that I think propels both of our goals, and everybody walks away happy. And especially when the wildfire comes in, which in the US we have no shortage of, some of those systems are more ready to be more resilient to the post-fire cascades. And so not just using this kind of work after a wildfire, but finding ways to integrate a lot of the fuels reductions and thinning work that some folks have brought up is a great way to just integrate different uplands restoration and valley bottom restoration.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We do have time for just one more question, or I'm going to squeeze one more question in here. This one is from Holly, and Holly's asking, has anyone experienced project failure, i.e. the project or structure doesn't achieve your goal? And what are some of the lessons that you've learned from these? There may be multiple speakers here who could answer that, but just looking at time, I will see if there's just one person who maybe wants to tackle that question.
I can jump in here if nobody else wants to. I would first challenge us to kind of reconceptualize how we're thinking about project failure. When we are adding wood to these systems, perhaps it will take multiple phases for us to achieve our restoration goals. And that's why we really encourage people to work in multiple phases and at different flow levels if your in-stream windows will allow. So implementing that pilot phase in your first year, coming back and readjusting because of how unique each system is. So kind of redefining what failure looks like. Maybe it's just a lesson learned. Some of the things we also have seen is wood movement coming out of a project area. And that goes back to the question about stream power and adjusting the size of your structures based on where you're working. And so that understanding of your flow, your sediment, your wood dynamics is just super important because it can help you understand how large of structures you really could and maybe should be building. Alex mentioned in the presentation kind of bringing in those larger root wads or key pieces to allow those smaller structures to reaggregate into. And so depending on what your project goals are, again, think about that multi-phased approach, really scale your structure types and your construction methods, how large those structures are based on the flow of your system. So really just before that project begins, conceptualize where you're at, where you're trying to get to, and then just continue learning those lessons as you move through that project.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. And it's really good piece of advice to rethink what we think of as failure. With that is 12 o'clock. So that is the end of our session. I want to thank all of our speakers here. It's been an incredible privilege to have such a vast amount of knowledge in this Zoom room with us today. I also want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. Reminder that a recording of this webinar will be made available on the BC Wildlife Federation's YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of the week. And all of the resources that have been shared in today's webinar will be sent out in a post-webinar email coming out tomorrow. And if you do have any questions, you can reach out to the BC Wildlife Federation, either to Jen Rogers at jennifer.rogers@bcwf.bc.ca or at wep@bcwf.bc.ca, and I can pop those in the chat as well. And with that, you're all welcome to go back to the rest of your day.